Communications and Conferences at TCG. I'm so grateful that you're all here. All of the work that goes into this forum feels totally worth it when we look out and see old and familiar faces and new friends. So a special thanks to everyone who lent their best thinking to help us craft this program. We had a wonderful task force, so thank you. I feel like every year we're becoming more connected as a field, and that's in large part to the people in this room. Thanks. And before I go any further, I mean, you guys have seen so many tireless staff working around the clock. It truly takes a village, so could we just give it up? Nimble but high-performing, functioning team of Devin Berkshire and Gus Schulenberg in our interim cabinet. I also wanted to acknowledge the work that happened yesterday before Robert O'Hara used my email as a punchline and stirred the pot so perfectly last night. The Spark leaders and the Diversity Inclusion Institute had full-day meetings. And I want to honor the honesty and vulnerability that everyone brought into those conversations. When you're at a convening with your peers, it can be hard to let your guard down and to be honest about your challenges. I hope that we can keep that spirit of authentic dialogue going as we move to our next panel and our conversations tomorrow. So, we're now moving to discuss the intersection of capitalization and governance, to hear stories from the trenches from pairs of trustees and theater leaders. I'd like to introduce the moderator of this panel, who you may be familiar with, Kevin E. Moore. We miss you, Kevin. The National Black Theater CEO Sade Lythcott and Board Chair Michael Lythcott. From Geffen Playhouse, Managing Director Ken Novice and Board Co-Chair Pamela Robinson. And Victory Gardens Theater, Artistic Director Chay and Board President Steve Miller.
Here we go. Okay, the first thing that we sort of wanted to do, so this morning, you know, we heard from Kathy Trower a lot about governance, and you know, I thought that was really fantastic. And then this afternoon, we heard about capitalization. And so what we thought we'd do right now, actually with this panel, is hear some stories about the merging of the two, and sort of how these two, governance and capitalization, work together. What the challenges are, what the successes been, and we sort of chose these theaters because we thought it was interesting, and they may want to touch on this as they talk, but each one of these theaters has recently really been through sort of a significant leadership change within the last 5 years or so, or 5 years or so, yeah. Some shorter than that, but at any rate, it might have been an opportunity for some conversations that you know, hasn't taken place, or it's just, it's an interesting sort of cohort. So, Dana introduced our panelists. I don't want to read their bios. These are such accomplished people. We would be up here for 30 minutes me reading each one of their bios. They really, each and every one of these individuals has a long list of accomplishments. Their bios are in your packets. I really do urge you to read them because we're honored to have these people sitting up here and talking to us today. So the first thing I really want to do is just have each pair sort of talk about your theater, where you are right now as far as capitalization governance, and just sort of an update on what your theater is, the budget side, etc. Okay, does that sound okay? Yeah, oh, yeah, you've got mics.
You want to start here? I can talk about the money.
Is this one? Okay, so the Geffen Playhouse, next year we're celebrating our 20th anniversary. And we have a budget size of just over $10 million, although it does fluctuate, just like everybody's, based on programming and such. And the Geffen's been in an interesting position right now. I think a very good, strong position right now. But we did go through a recent transition with a leader. I've been with the Geffen almost 6 years. Pamela's been on the board, how long now? Almost 15 years. So Pamela can give you a better sense of what the Geffen was like prior to that. Although I just wanted to mention that of the 6 years that I've been at the Geffen, I was there with Gil Cates, who was our founder and who passed away suddenly 3 years ago on Halloween. So I had essentially 2.5 years to work with Gil. And he set a culture at that organization that is very strong and sort of very familial. The people that are at the Geffen have been there for quite some time, feel a strong connection to that theater. They're very, very passionate about it. And it's all based on this sort of platform that Gil built. The challenge that we have from a governance perspective is that Gil's a very strong leader, and being as well known as he was in the Hollywood community, really drove the success of that company for quite some time. So when we lost Gil, we had a big challenge there in terms of how do we continue to operate at the strength level that we had when he was there in terms of connections to Hollywood. I just wanted to see if you want to say a few words about Gil and sort of before.
I've known Gil, I knew Gil for 30 some odd years, so I was with the Geffen when it was just starting as a theater. I think it was 5 years old. And Gil was the head of the UCLA Film and Television Department. He produced 14 Academy Awards, and he was beloved. He was beloved, so you could still feel his ghost and his soul on the patio of the Geffen Playhouse. And his soul lives there, but in a very positive way. And I think he's not a ghost, it's his soul. When Susan Nelson spoke, and I think even Kathy Trower made mention of a singular person at the theater, he was he founded the theater, and the main stage was dedicated to him, so it's the Gil Cates Theater. But on the positive side of that was that when he first started the board, he had Hollywood luminaries on our board. You know, Jeffrey Katzenberg, Steven Spielberg, Bruce Raymer, the important entertainment attorneys. And when he passed away, these people, everybody rallied. Or Gil, before he passed away, could pick up the phone and raise a lot of money. And one of the things that struck me was, and I don't know that anybody touched upon it, is the networking connections of the board and those relationships that need to be fostered and called upon. And as Ken just said, the culture is so strong that the theater is thriving. No one left. Everybody stayed. The board is stronger because of a combination of when Frank Mancuso took over. Frank was the head of Paramount at the time, a very dear friend of Gil's, and joined Gil on the board. I think he was he on the board when you came 5 years ago? So he wasn't on the board since the beginning, but he came on the board and took over when Gil passed away. He really stepped in, and Ken can attest to this. He set up meetings with the staff. He was at the theater. He just poured his heart into it, and everybody rallied, and we feel very, very fortunate that that was the case, because oftentimes if a leader, passes on or leaves, change is always really hard. And the change has been hard. We haven't been without challenges, but it's been very, very positive. So we've gone from a singular leader. I was elected to co-chair the board with my co-chair Martha Henderson from City National Bank. And we are the first elected board chairs in 20 years. Gil was the chair of our board, and then Frank Mancuso took over, and then us. And change is hard, they knew us, but oh my God, 2 women are going to be running this board now. There may be too much estrogen in this room, but it's been very, very healthy, and I'm very proud to be associated with the theater and proud to be co-chair of the board.
We can get into capitalization later, or do you want to talk about that?
Let's do an introduction first,
great.
and then just sort of, general, and then we'll talk about capitalization for sure.
My name is Sade Lythcott. I am the CEO of the National Black Theater. National Black Theater is here in New York, in the heart of Harlem. We're a 46-year-old institution founded by our mother. So secession, literally. So I hear someone saying there was a secession plan similar to you guys' story. our mother's death was unexpected 6 years ago, and both my brother and I had very successful careers outside of theater. And I love that this is a group of theater folks, so you can kind of just talk and say what you have to say. Our mom's mantra really was, I don't know why I'm working so hard, y'all Negroes aren't gonna take it over. And then you get that phone call. And so I think the New York Times wrote an article about us, and I think one of the lines was that I was an accidental CEO, which on some levels is true, and on some levels, you know, when you are raised around the theater and it is mission-driven work, we're not a commercial theater, obviously we're a small nonprofit, that mission and that vision really, you don't realize how much it's coursing through your veins. So we are an institution that is about a 600,000, it fluctuates a little bit, to right under $1 million operating budget. And I would say that where we have had challenges in our succession plan, which was a little bit accidental, is we really feel fortunate in our inheritance, because what we realize is that we are inheriting an opportunity to continue a legacy and a vision. And in order for it to be viable for the next generation, we, unlike the singularly focused force that was our mother, Dr. Barbara Antier, we quickly assessed that we needed to divide capitalization and governance with the mission and the art that we produce. She was one person trying to hold all of those, and we actually got the kind of opportunity, and I really do think it's a privilege to be in partnership so that we can kind of attack both from different angles, but with the same kind of passion for vision and mission coursing literally through our blood and veins. The last thing I'll say about the institution itself is that, you know, for us, social justice and social issues have been at the forefront. And so if the theater works, it's because the community in which we serve really works with us, and there's this, has always been for almost half a century, this reciprocal relationship. And as our community changes and is nimble, and the demographic changes, we have been able to kind of capitalize off of that. And I would say that the last thing I'll say before I pass it to my brother, our board chair, is that something that Susan Nelson really pointed out when we became leadership about 6 years ago. We had to really look at a lot of recovery capital, what that looks like. And that's really our story of secession, is being able to kind of pinpoint that that is what we needed. And what makes us unique too is that we own our property. And I think that that also, with the singular force that was Dr. Barbara Antier owning this, you know, city block in the middle of New York City, Manhattan real estate. My mom used to always funnily say, we own the most important real estate in New York City. It's the most famous. Because you can go anywhere around the world and say Fifth Avenue, and everybody knows you're talking about New York and opulence and like what Fifth Avenue is. And when you say 125th Street, people know Harlem and culture and art. So we own the corner of Fifth Avenue and 125th Street. So, which comes with its challenges, and so that's something about our and that's a big part of our burden and our opportunity, is maintaining the institution from that standpoint.
My name is Michael Lythcott. Obviously, an article after my sister. She's a great speaker. So, but I would like to just sort of put a little bit of the situation when we had the succession plan. It happened. It was really, we stepped in because no one else could have. There were a lot of challenges around the building. There was a lot of capital that had to be raised, and it was a real challenge, and certainly not something that the mayor or anyone else thought could transition easily. So 5 years later, we've done something that has been really hard to do, which is we're happy to share the story with people. And part of that was separating the property from the nonprofit, because as the previous speaker mentioned, we had a very small budget, and my mom built an $11 million building in 1990. It was the first new construction in Harlem in 25 years. And the organization just never could handle the $7 or $8 million worth of debt that came with the property. You know, our family initially did the gift to buy it. So just to give you an example of what the property was worth, you know, we bought it for under $400,000 in 1983, and you know the appraised value now is north of 20. So it created a lot of opportunity and debt opportunities. So it was a lot of problems. So we had to separate the property from the nonprofit temporarily and sort of restructure each individually. And that's really been our roles for the last 4.5 years. $12 million restructuring of the property and total staff change in the organization. And now we're coming back together to sort of reintegrate it with the help of people like TCG and Ford and Mel and others. So that's our story. It's pretty interesting.
Hi, my name is Chay, Artistic Director of Victory Gardens Theater in Chicago. To my right is Steve Miller, Board Chair. He'll share more about the information with numbers with you, since I'll just go with my right brain for now. Victory Gardens, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary. 40 years ago, several Chicago theater artists banded together and said we're going to found a theater in true Chicago spirit. And a few years later, emerged Dennis Sade, who became the artistic director. And together with Marcy McVeigh, managing director, they basically were in the theater through probably 2011. And I came in just 3 years ago, the second artistic director in the theater's history. And in the course of Dennis's and Marcy's legacy, they garnered the Tony Award for Best Regional Theater in 2001, I believe. And also in Dennis's tenure, he also founded an ensemble of resident playwrights, the Ensemble Playwrights, which amassed about 14. When I first got this interview, and I didn't know much about Victory Gardens, I had to do some Googling. And I wasn't really sure also whether to take the reins of running a theater, because I felt comfortable always working in new plays, and particularly plays of diversity. To my great surprise, the mission of the theater spoke directly to my sensibilities. And again, I always say this about Dennis Zajac and all those people I stand on, particularly on their shoulders, is because of their work and their commitment to diversity and also social justice that I'm standing in front of you, sitting in front of you, being in the field. So I think the passing of the baton was very special for me. And what I had done basically was to build on Dennis's legacy, call it a 2.0 version of his mission. And aside from that, what I've done so far is basically to just amplify what Dennis had done. And for example, the ensemble, which many of you may have read in the New York Times, has transitioned to alumnus, and I basically brought on 4 playwrights from the country and from Chicago, and in a few months we may actually magnify it to 8. And out of, I think, Dennis's vision for the city, I'm also very interested in Chicago stories, and being an immigrant, history and Chicago has always been fascinating for me. So my question was, what are Chicago stories? Again, back to the community. And again, I give a big nod to, like with Robert O'Hara, to George C. Wolfe, who was a mentor, as well as Gordon Davidson.
Thanks, Chay. Victory Gardens, as Chay said, is celebrating its 40th year this year. One thing you didn't mention that some people may not know about Marcy and Dennis was that they were husband and wife. So we were sort of a family business too. And actually, I grew up in a family business, but fortunately that one was actually for-profit. It really didn't prepare me at all for theater. We have a budget between $2 and $3 million, I describe my job to people as the best full-time job I've ever had that I have to pay for. But we've made a lot of progress. We've made significant progress. We also, prior to my time on the board, the organization undertook a significant project to renovate an old movie theater called the Biograph in Chicago, which some of you may know. The most famous thing, before we got involved, before Victory Gardens was there, the most famous thing that happened there was that the gangster John Dillinger was shot outside the Biograph after seeing a movie there. And actually, the tour buses still come by the Untouchables tour and all that, and they stop and they take pictures. We'd like to think it's because of all the great work we're doing at Victory Gardens and the Biograph. Hopefully some of that is. But anyway, there was some debt that was taken on in order to do that project, and that combined with the transition not only in artistic leadership but in our managing director, as you heard as well. And some of you may recall there was a little blip in the economy in 2008. I don't know if any of you heard or read that, but it impacted us as well. It's kind of a perfect storm of a lot of change and a lot of transition. And we've been able to work together. Chris Minelli, who's our managing director, who's sitting here, and Chris Schramm is our director of development. We've been working really together as a team and with the board to really get a lot healthier. We've just finished the fiscal year with a surplus, which had not been in our vocabulary. I come from the venture capital business, so I invest in startups, and a lot of these startups fail, and take risks. And I've tried to take some of those lessons that I learned from that and bring it to this field. One of the lessons I've learned is that I tried to redefine the word nonprofit to actually breaking even as opposed to losing shitloads of money. I'm pretty sure we've all bought into that now. So I'll stop there.
I like the term. So Ken and Pamela, tell us a little bit about the Geffen's capitalization and how well capitalized or undercapitalized.
Well, the Geffen is housed in a building that is owned by UCLA. And so we have a very good situation in terms of our physical space. Although the building was built in 1920, it was a Masonic temple. It's a gorgeous building. If anybody comes to LA, if you've been there, it's just beautiful. I used to wonder before I got the job there, why did they put the building on all the brochures? The cover of the brochures, they should put actors on there or something. And then I started working there and I realized why. It's just a stunning place and it has a sense of warmth when you walk into it. But because it was built such a long time ago, it needed a renovation. And it's been about 9 years now, I think, since the renovation. And that saddled the organization with some debt. And we worked, well, that's right, we renovated the building, we added a second stage to it. We built another building actually next door that houses the new theater, more offices, and then dressing rooms and wardrobe and things like that. So we were sitting with this debt when I got to the organization in 2009, and we started working very hard towards retiring that debt because we found, as you all know, it's a lot easier to raise money when you're debt free. And we successfully did that 3 years ago. And since that time, it's really been a great help to us on the fundraising side. And we've been able to generate revenues that have given us a operating surplus that we feel very comfortable with. So we're not in a position where if a play happens to not do well this year, that we're going to really struggle over that. But at the same time, we did something that was talked about in the last session, which was we, and at the board level, made a decision through a strategic plan to do everything we could to not operate at a deficit for a 5-year period. And we instituted new programs to do that, which we can talk about, I can talk about later. But we've, since that time, had a surplus for 5 years running, and we're building that, that cash surplus so that should there be a problem, we would be able to withstand that. And that's where we stand now. So we feel really good going forward. We are in the quiet phase right now of a campaign to take us to that stability place that was on the slides that you saw in the previous session. We are now looking at We feel comfortable with the theater as it is now financially, for the next few years, but we really feel like we'd like to set it up for the next 20 or 30 years. And so we've talked a lot, Pamela and I and other board members, about endowment, and we're not necessarily interested in permanently restricted endowment, but we are in a quiet phase of raising a temporarily restricted endowment. We have a first leadership gift in place with that, a matching gift, so we're well on our way with that as well. But I guess the one point I want to make though about all of that is, all of that sounds really great, and it is, but sometimes we look around the staff, the organization, and I can see how hard everyone's worked, and the sense of, when do we get a break is kind of there. And so, the sweat equity and what have you that we put in to get to that position has taken its toll. So we do feel like this sense of building some stability around the company will give us an opportunity to take care of people, maybe to add a couple of positions here and there, so that people are working at what we would think would be reasonable, well, for theater hours, I should say reasonable theater hours, which is more than anybody else would work anyway. So that's where we are now.
Yeah. Did you say, I might have missed this part, but when you retired your dad, did you do that through a campaign? I mean, how did
it was done through a campaign.
Just closest friends and family, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. We went it was a friends and family campaign. We have a terrific chief development officer who led that campaign, and we got it done in about 9 months.
So Pamela, from your perspective, I'd love to hear how the board was involved in this sort of capitalization. I mean, how much did the entire board know about the debt and the plan? I mean, was everybody brought into this process?
Yes. The board knew everything, and the board was very instrumental and helpful and supportive, and reached out to certain community members and our financial relationships, and everybody supported it. Another thing, I know we're not talking about programming, but in terms of raising more money, we decided to have present productions on Monday nights when the theater's dark, and we did an umbrella naming called the Spotlight Series. So under the Spotlight Series, we can create alternative programming, whether it's an individual star, or it's a comedian for a night, or music, and it's interesting getting everybody to buy into that, because it has been extra work for the staff.
Yeah.
And it also, we needed the buy-in from our artistic director, who's wonderful, Randall Arney. And everyone sees the value in it, but it's a lot of, it's work, yeah, but it's been very successful. It really has.
The one thing I'll add to that was when we thought about that, I know we're all looking at alternative programming, ways to bring in revenue, other revenue streams, is we created this thing that we call it the Spotlight Entertainment Series, that is, it's mission aligned, but it's not necessarily right down on our mission, because our mission is about doing plays. And what we do with the Spotlight Series is everything from a play to a magic show to a comedian to a music event. And we try to align each one of those events in some way with the mission or the core of our business, which is theater. So everybody who's done something for us in the Spotlight Series comes from a theatrical background. They're either actors or directors or what have you. And so we've been able to connect that very easily. And of course it helps being in Los Angeles, because there's a lot of people who do theater but also do other things.
And also, the response from our audience has been huge, and they actually want to see more of that. So we're working on it.
And I will point out that earlier when I was up here, I said something about theater facts, and that earned income was up over the last 5 years, mainly due to the stock market and investments, but the fastest growing line item is other. I mean, people are really experimenting with different workshops or readings or, presentations or, whatever. So there are theaters are being really creative.
And I think they expect that from the Geffen, probably because we are known as Hollywood's theater, and they expect the best, and we try to deliver. We can't hit 100% all of the time, but we try.
So Sade, I want to hear, and Michael, I want to hear a little bit about the process that you guys went through in making the decision, you know, to sort of restructure the properties from that. I mean, the pain that was involved or not.
Yeah, so,
Oh, boy. Family dynamics. That's what.
It's also how it works at home. Or it doesn't work. So I'll just speak creatively because he can get much more in depth around the property because, and he'll say it, he's really been dealing with aspects of the property since he's 15 years old. Talk about sweat equity. But what I would say is when our mom died, it was a catastrophic loss to our family, to the theater, to the Harlem community. And so we were left with like a triage situation. Everything is hemorrhaging, everything is bleeding. Where do you choose to focus where you have the hemorrhaging stop first? And I think we had to have some really hard conversations. And when I say we, I really mean our staff, our current board, and my brother and I. And one of the things that we chose to focus on was separating the two and to start engaging community. So my responsibility was we have to be able to keep our doors open and to continue to offer a product our community and audience wants to see. Even if we have to scale back the amount of programmatic activity, it has to be quality and it has to really, in this very tenuous time, reek of vision and mission. Because my mom was such a dedicated, our mom was such a dedicated worker that people really didn't even know she had children. So these two people walk up and we're like interlopers that have lived in Harlem our whole lives. So that really challenging conversation allowed me a little bit of freedom not to stress about what he was going to stress and focus on, but to really singularly execute based on vision, the art, and mission. And then I would say that we also got really good advice really early on that said, in this moment of triage, take a breath, a pause, to actually assess what the issues are. And for us, we had a mostly founding board that served an incredible commitment for so many decades based on a business model that no longer served the institution. And so that we had to look at governance and board from the same nimble way that we looked at programmatic activity. And then my brother can talk more about that.
thanks.
It's your turn.
So I just, to give you a picture of it, so I personally, we're writing $250,000 plus checks every year to deal with the debt on the building and the other operating losses. So, you know, when mom passed away, the funeral was almost $1 million, and you know, we spent a lot of money for the first several years, and we just went to our personal reserves to do that. I think, you know, when we decided to separate the property from the building, it was very hard because it's iconic, and the organization's identity was so closely tied to it. But again, it's buildings and the space utilization sometimes is better in a for-profit modality. And Chay did some really amazing things. Like my mom would never do co-productions before, so we did co-productions. To service some of the community stuff, she did Open Talent Night. So again, a lot of programmatic changes to serve our funders, which were very limited, because the building basically generated most of the money to solve the organizational problems. And so now it's got a much more commercial focus on the building, which is good. And the idea is to do another capital campaign. So we're launching another like $100 million capital campaign to change the building over again, which is great. But then the theater will be like a condo tenant in that property, as opposed to owning 100% of it, which is much better. And then we can do condo fees and other things to have the building sort of permanently support the organization, which was the original business model. However, I would say this about people that are very capital facility focused. To me, it can limit the mission, because what happens is your facility becomes basically, between my mom's just dynamic personality and the iconic address and building that we had, it sort of blocks the organization into a box. And there's technology, and there's other kinds of things, touring. I mean, other organizations, like Alvin Ailey, who was my mom's very good friend, we watched his transition as children. And my mom, we told the story today, my mom would say, they just cut Alvin out. The board came over, and he used to come pick up Sade and take her to dance class, because he didn't have anything else to do. I mean, his board basically wiped him out. And Alvin's not known now for a building. Alvin's known because the tours all over the world, and he's got a global brand. But we watched the real violence that happened to him personally when he was forced to transition his organization. And my mom just swore that would never happen to her, so she insulated herself from that. But also, 25 years later, you can look at what happened to Alvin's company, and you can say, he made some hard choices, and it was very painful for him personally, but he does the work globally, and there's a giant impact, and so there was a lot of benefit to that. And so she insulated herself from that experience also. So, like for example, with Ford, for example, my mom very famously in 1968, turned down Ford money, and we had to find, Sade got Ford money back for the first time last year, or this year. Without apologizing, we just did it, and we just do the work differently, and we have a different kind of face of the organization. So it really was from a fundraising perspective, capital perspective, and we are the only people that had the sensitivity with the community and the people that we serve to actually navigate that. So in our case, it helped that we were her children, because I think if we hadn't been, it would have been impossible to fix this, I think.
And I'll just say one thing really quickly about capitalization. So when the property got purchased, the business model, and this is to what Susan Nelson was talking to us about, was really that the real estate would subsidize the art. So our originating board, their muscle wasn't a fundraising board. It wasn't to raise funds. I mean, the real estate for decades really was the financial engine. And so we were in a very special place that we could make unapologetic Black art, right? But we had this really sexy address where developers were coming after us all the time. And so if we didn't dot an I or cross a T, we would have problems. So our board was really an amazing group of people that just fought off poachers, really. So when we decided to take the property out of the equation, all of a sudden we have a board that served so incredibly, but no longer was really at the crux of what our new business model will be. So for MBT, in this succession process, we are having simultaneously to strengthen a muscle that we never really had to, which is, foundation support, corporate support, individual donor support, this standard practice nonprofit model, which never was really ours as a culture. So our board now, with our new board members that we have brought on, are more reflective of still being cheerleaders for us, but with the understanding of how governance has changed and how our business model has changed. And so, even though we're almost a half a century old, we're kind of newbies to a lot of this, so this weekend's been helpful.
Good. Let's hear from Chay and Steve, sort of the story of the renovation and the capitalization of Victory Gardens. I'd love to hear just sort of your story of pain and success and happiness, too.
How long do we have? Well, interestingly enough, neither one of us was around for the renovation part.
Yeah, okay.
But
you had the debt from it. I mean, correct?
Oh yeah, we were there for the pain part. Yes, we definitely had that. It's been a lot of hard work. One of the things that we did early on in my tenure, and I'm sort of in the middle of my third year as president of the board, I put together a task force to focus solely on the building. First of all, was this building appropriate for us, for the work that we do, new work, which doesn't exactly sell thousands of tickets every performance. And this was the main stage was 299 seats, right? And then we had a studio space as well with 100-ish, yeah. So was that? I'm not sure whether that question was ever asked when the opportunity to renovate the Biograph Theater into Victory Gardens. If anybody ever thought to ask, well, does the work that Victory Gardens does, that we do, belong in a space like that? It just sort of was exciting. This is a block and a half away from the sort of storefront-ish space that Victory Gardens was in. So we weren't going to change neighborhoods, and it probably seemed to be a really good idea. And I forgot the speaker just before the break who talked about growth without demand. I'm pretty sure that may have been what happened with us. Again, I wasn't there. Chay wasn't there. So we've done some things. Another thing we did with the task force was look at the business model itself and say, is that still valid? So the results of that task force were that yes, the business model is still valid. There are things we could do with this space, or maybe we could leave this space, or maybe, there were lots of options we looked at. And all along, we also, on the development side, we're looking for folks to take out the remaining debt. In the middle, as things went along, we looked at the costs, the whole cost structure of the operation, not just the payments on the debt, but everything else that we were doing as an organization. We were able to cut some of those things. We were able to increase our revenue. We were able to bring in a top-notch development person to do real development work. An example of that, we just had our gala a few weeks ago. We raised more money from our gala than we've ever done in 25 years before that. So it's those kinds of things that are happening. And we've also found a donor who's going to take out the debt. So that's going to be really good too.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's like, I feel like one of the core themes is that in all of these stories, it really was the board and the leadership as a team working together to do this. It was here's our problem. We got to tell you about it. We got to get this, and then everybody coming together to go to the organization.
Well, I'll just say quickly, for organizations that have buildings like that, it's very difficult for funders to, in a lot of areas, make a straight decision or a gift when you have this capital requirements of real estate and the cost around that, especially if there's not an additional funding source or other revenue line coming in to support the facility. So it's really exciting to have new buildings, and and you want to be an owner of things, and that's great. But you have to be very, very, very careful about this, and sometimes, like I said, separating it legally and creating two different teams to address the challenges separately. And on the real estate side, obviously it's mission driven. So we're like an impact, investment of ours. It's definitely focused on preserving the National Black Theater on one level, but also like, okay, well, how do we, as just owners of real estate, what's the long-term vision of monetizing property so that it has a stable business plan? And that really allows Sade to have conversations with funders that she'll spend the first 30 minutes talking about the real estate and the debt and sovereign bank and all the other structures that are involved, and that just can just take up the wind out of the room. If people just can believe you can either service your debt or not, or what your long term. It just creates a whole nother level of conversation, and it takes away from your ability to communicate impact, and then your ability to get people excited about your impact and then make donations. In the same way, I think clearing your debt was probably very helpful for you in the same way, is that it was just in the way of you talking about work that you were doing. And so you needed to sort of address that before you got to the second piece. And so, our mom never would have done that. She just, for her, everything was, it was like, it's all part of who she was. So And I don't know if we had been 2 people if we would have done that. It just was so much work. We were like, okay, you handle this pile of work, and you handle this pile of work, and that's how we go.
Yeah.
Kind of just jump in real quick. There's something you mentioned that really struck a chord with us, and that is that there was a vision behind where the Geffen was going that Gil had created, that the founder had created, and we were able to carry that forward, and that vision was clearly articulated. It was really cool. I mean, he came up with this idea of the theater that when it was founded 20 years ago now, that was Act 1 of a 3-act play. And in his mind, even at that time, he saw this as a 3-act play. The second act being the renovation of that building, which was old and needed a lot of work to be done, and he wanted a second space. And the third act was then the future of the theater, securing that and creating that stability. He outlined that 20 years ago. So we had the luxury of a very well thought out and well articulated vision for the future of the Geffen. And it also gave us the opportunity to go back to founding donors to say, okay, thank you for Act 1. We're now approaching Act 2, 12 or 13 years later, and now we're approaching Act 3, 7 or 8 years after that. And so we've been successful at getting some of our donors who came in at the very beginning and were the founders of the theater with Gil, some of the people that Pamela mentioned, and got them to come back again because they knew from the outset that we were looking at 3 acts here.
The other thing that strikes me too is all 3, and I'm not sure we did this on purpose, maybe we did. All 3 of you are really following, these legendary leaders of your organizations, and you're embracing these people instead of Chay. I mean, you could come in and say, no, it's mine now, and just honoring that legend, that came before you is admirable. It's wonderful.
Yeah, this is just a personal thing. I think many people think new artistic directors that come from out of town is going to just change the entire thing.
Yeah.
I think there's always that in the back of your mind, but I always feel like most artistic directors, like very good directors, look at it as a play. What's the play saying? And as a result of that, it has to speak to its communities. And I think finding the right home as an artistic director is the most crucial thing. I remember that it was a commitment, and my thing was, what is it about Chicago, particularly, that is going to strike me? And the fascinating thing is, doing some anthropological uncovering some of the stories and the histories, I basically fell in love with what is going to be happening to the next chapter of the Victory Gardens, especially what Danny Zajac was basically trying to aim the theater toward. I mean, I remember my first week, someone said, Chicago's the most racially segregated city in the country. I freaked out for a half an hour, then I got really excited. I realized, well, I think there's more work to be done. And I think that's what the theater always has been about. And the question was also, what is, the theater in the 21st century? Because missions do change. And I think my being a playwright as well as a director was also a very complicated thing. But the fact that we were a playwrights theater, I intrinsically understood what playwrights really wanted. So it's still, I think, a dating situation between me and Chicago. We're learning what we like to eat. I'm learning about narratives, because I feel like what narratives may have worked on the East Coast or on the West Coast may be very different in Chicago. Then my question is, how do we communicate? And again, old school here, because I was mentored by some wonderful socialists. I believe the theater belongs to the people. So my question is, I'm learning about what does it mean to actually give it back to the people in Chicago. And I will also say that I could not have done this without the partnerships and the friendships and the camaraderie that came from other Chicago theaters.
That's great. Please.
I think that embracing the heritage, which I think we all have done, you embrace the past and you embrace the heritage, and then tweak things and move things forward. And I know as co-chair of the board, we're trying to bring in the next generation, which was discussed here. So we brought in some younger board members, people that also embrace the passion and that, want to help create new and innovative things that go on at the theater, and yet embrace what we have always been. We'd always produced one classic American play, and then some emerging. In fact, we have a board member here with us, Brad Edgerton, who's very interested in emerging playwrights, and we thank him for that. We're interested in it as well, and we'll support that, and he's going to support that. So it's a very exciting time, and I think when you're respectful of what the theater has been and then can move it forward, it's like the best of both worlds.
I think it's safe to say that we all thank Brad and Novice Edgerton for their work.
I would say really quickly, one of the things that really, it's a small thing that resounded, was when Defina was introducing the panel, she referred to the word the trenches. And so that's kind of where we sit. The idea of looking at governance and recasting your board or adding to your board really is about being in the trenches. And I think Susan Nelson even talked about it and how you communicate with your board and around governance. So for us, it wasn't about really getting the sexiest board member who could write the biggest check, but it was who could be in the trenches with us that really understood mission and vision and could help us slowly and incrementally raise funds. And also, it was about institutional marketing and tell our story in a 21st century way. So for us, an effective and impactful board and governance that is reflective of that is kind of broken down into different categories. And there's your aspirational board member, but where we are in this kind of secession and transition are board members that are willing kind of to roll up their sleeves and do the best job you've ever had for free, or like, you know, it's worse than free. And that we don't see our board members really as a blank check, but we see them as an opportunity to build family and therefore capacity.
Yeah.
And that is a whole different kind of way. And the check that they were originally gonna write grows because they really get it, right? And that's kind of the ultimate board member.
Yeah, I would say, I'd say one more thing. So Shani and I had a unique set of assets going into this situation. So she had a lot of celebrity friends, and I had a lot of very wealthy CEO household name type friends. Both had household name friends. So I went to her and I said, well, why don't you just get all your celebrities to come and do a video? And she was like, this is not a situation I can bring those people. So why don't you ask all of your big board member friends? I said, I cannot bring my friends to this way. So and that's the truth. The truth was, we were just being her because the organization was not in a condition that we were willing to expose, for what good reason, those relationships. And still, it's been years. Everyone did a video for us, so we got Lenny Kravitz and everyone did a video for us. But I bet that was hard for her to do, and that took a long time to make that request. So what I like to say, from an investor standpoint is, you have to look at each board request, and I know everyone says, well, my board should raise all this money, as what's the capacity of the organization in terms of its processes and resources. So if I'm making an investment in a startup company, for example, which is a separate kind of thing, you can't put someone from IBM on the board of a startup company, generally because they're used to a lot of process. And since they control resources, if they don't see a lot of process, they get afraid to put any resources into it. And the same token, I have some friends that are 10 startups, they love just starting things and then making them bigger. Those guys hate process, and when they see process, they're like, oh, this is never gonna work, process is broke, and they don't wanna put resources in something without processes. So I think what we learned through trial and error, really, is that, we had to sort of create a 10-year plan as to where we thought the board would be stable. So your board sounds like our board 10 years from now. It's people who are family offices, people are big corporations, it's part of their basically job to be on the board, and those kinds of people generally require a lot of process, a lot of visibility, reserve accounts, all the kinds of things you'd expect in an $8+ million operating business. Those people, and they're very helpful in that situation, right? So to get there, we had to do a bunch of things, triage, separate the property, and put back together later. But along each step, the board members get further and further away from our friends. So we realized the situation we were in was we had to make work with what we had, where we were, get it to a place where the numbers were a little easier and better, where there was a little more process. That required dealing with people that basically raised us to put them into a different kind of situation. Chay brought in a new artistic director. She's doing work that my mom never would have done, but it's fantastic and revolutionary and creating a lot of buzz. And that freedom only came because she had the ability to do that. And as we stabilize and move from, so we actually, as we moved from like one thing to vulnerable, so that was awesome. And like we're on our way to like the next box, I forget what that was, but it's like, you know, and that's just the 10-year plan. So, but at each box, right, you can create a board transition that sort of moves into each box. So what was frustrating was, you know, I call a friend of mine who's a giant guy who writes big checks. He's not gonna, I mean, unless he's writing me a personal favor, and that he doesn't need to be your board member for, right? I mean, if it's just a personal favor, you can just go ask him for a personal favor. Hey, I need a personal favor. And it's very funny. I said one time I took my birthday, and I said, instead of spending $5,000 on some fancy birthday, why don't everyone make a donation? The checks were a lot smaller. You know, it was just like it was a very different thing. People just give different when it's like, so it is what it is, but you have to realize where you are, plan accordingly, and I think just being honest is the hardest part.
That is. It is. That's just the hardest part.
And I'll say something really quick. I do work that Mom would be very proud of. It's very mission and vision driven. It just feels like the 21st century, not the 60s.
I want to be in a board meeting with you too. oh my gosh, I just had something in my head, I lost it. But what I was, one of the things I was going to say is obviously, oh, I know what it is. You know, the one through line that I've heard all day today too is that these changes that we're talking about making don't happen overnight. I mean, at all. They take a really long time. And, you know, there's this myth that if theater's in trouble, if they get the right executive director, that person can turn it around in a year. And, you know, it takes a long time. It's the whole board, it's the staff, and it's everybody working together to do this. You can't sit on one person, whether it's the board chair or one spectacular or even two spectacular board members. It's a whole group of people.
I absolutely agree with that. It's got to be people working together, right? It's the same thing in a startup. Startups are successful if the team is working together and they get advice from the board. They don't always agree with it, but they come to a consensus and then run through brick walls to execute it. It's the same thing. That's how it's worked at our place as well. One thing that struck me just from before, besides the fact that you said you were mentored by socialists. I was mentored by capitalists. Maybe that's why we worked together so well.
That's a perfect pair. That's a perfect pair.
I married the daughter of a dentist. But what's interesting, I think, is that, and this goes back to people and having the right people in place. In the case of your two institutions, the legend, which I think was the term that you used, is no longer with you. In our case, Dennis is directing our play that we open on Friday. Dennis is still with us, and so that each of the situations brings its own unique challenges and possibilities. And I think Chay, our whole team, and Dennis really have worked together really well to make that full of possibilities.
Right.
But it always comes down to the people. It always comes down to again, board and staff working together to make these things happen.
Yes.
I want to just second that too. You know, what's interesting at the Geffen was shortly after Gil passed away, Frank Mancuso, who was our board chair at the time, made a decision to come in and work with Randy and I and the staff on a regular basis. And we connected with the board in ways that we weren't before. So what you're saying is exactly right. It took the group of us together to sit down and think about where we were going, what the next steps would be. Because that first year after Gil was gone it was crazy. You know, it was a little bit of triage too. You know, we were trying to just fix everything. and make sure everybody felt like things were going to be okay. But it really took the chair who came in and spent time with the staff, and then other board members, among them Pamela and others, who really worked with us to define the future and where we're going. And we're actually still in that process. We're working very hard right now on a strategic plan for the next 5 years. So we'll see where that goes, but it absolutely took everybody together.
I'm curious about that. I thought it was great, and I want to repeat it because I hear it so much, and we all do, but you know, people always say the business model is broken, the business model is broken. And I often think that people mean, you know, the nonprofit theater business model, you know. And I loved it when Susan said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your business model. Because, you know, that's so important. And all of you guys have had to do that. I mean, all of you guys have had to do that. Now, was that also, did that involve the board looking at the business model? You know, I don't know if you can give me an example of like staff presented to the board. You know, so often staff goes to the board and presents the solution. Do you know what I'm saying? And doesn't involve the board in the...
In our case, it was really simple. Like, you know, we were personally writing big checks. You know,
yeah.
So, you know, at a certain point, we were like, this, you know, isn't sustainable. And, you know, in a lot of ways, funders are, like in the local business, funders are your outside validation point. So, you know, if you're going to people that write checks for a living and they're not writing you checks, then you know, you need to look at why that is. And maybe you're just 20 years ahead of your time, in which case you have to prepare for that. Or maybe you're just doing things in a way where you're having trouble communicating, which is another problem. Or maybe you're just doing things that may not be as effective as you could do them if you changed. So, you know, we didn't really have the luxury of, you know, oh, we said, oh, well, I think maybe we should change this or that. It was like, okay, we have to change some things right now because, you know, my mom could pick up the phone and call anybody and get stuff done right away. And, you know, people were nice for the first year, but after that, it's, you know, we're not the same person.
I would also say for us, one of the other things that I do, and it's great that I see Woody in the audience, is I sit on, I'm the chair of Coalitions of Theaters of Color, and that gave me a unique perspective of, in looking at the challenges that you're talking about, was that the elephant in the room is that we are a cultural arts organization, and that what we offer really, and a lot of our business practices and modalities are influenced by our culture, and it influences the quality and the content of our art. And that if we were approaching our challenges or recasting the board or governance from a standard practice business model that was 501c3 nonprofit arts organization, we were really missing an opportunity to really look at what our strengths and weaknesses are, and that our culture and our cultural paradigm and traditions play a huge part in how we engage community, how we engage funders, and what our opportunity really is. So this idea of diversity and inclusion, what does a diversity and inclusion look like in an institution that is primarily diverse, and like, you know, it's kind of looking at it from the other model. So for us, it really was going back to our literal roots and seeing that. And I think also the point about bringing up Coalitions of Theaters of Color was that some of what we thought were unique experiences that our institution were going through were happening in all of the theaters of color. And so that was really big. And how do we create a narrative that speaks to the opportunity of being a niche kind of offering, and that we can change the narrative from we're underfunded, we're in underserved communities, we've never gotten this, what if we change the narrative about, and only spoke from the point of view of opportunity? I mean, and the challenges are kind of, you know what the challenges are, so we don't have to hold that as our mandate, but we can kind of speak through the opportunities. And so that's what we did with our board, kind of shift the narrative of what it was to be a half-century-old theater in Harlem as what an incredible opportunity that people have to experience the way we articulate our culture to the world.
Yeah, it's exactly what Susan was saying, impact. Our potential impact,
Absolutely.
impact.
And when you can change, and so when you can measure impact in a kind of way, your goers and your payers really can be in this wonderful conversation, because when we were able to change our narrative, our payers were like, yes, you are speaking what we've been trying to figure out. The question mark that a lot of these funders are talking about, we can actually offer them the answer to that, because we're thinking about it from that kind of perspective. And our goers are totally, that's the one thing I think, I won't say we ever took for granted our goers, because that's what we do. It's all about the people. It's all about the community. It starts and kind of ends there. It has for us, but that we can not just produce art from a space that feels like when you can't make payroll, that feels like a sacrifice, but it feels like we can now leverage all these goers that we have as impact of why the work that we do is important, and then use that narrative to talk to payers and really get people excited. And it's very funny that they're so excited right now, because it's the work we've always been doing, but the narrative changed around it, and it just makes such a big difference.
Yeah, it does. It does. I feel like it's time for Q&A, actually. I feel like people are probably dying to ask these very smart people some questions, so.
Hi, David Schmitz from Steppenwolf Theater Company. Thank you all for taking the time to talk to us. I think that was really interesting and some really great practical examples. I have a comment and a question. The comment is just saying on behalf of Chicago. Chay, I would love to just ask if you would want to leave your toothbrush in our apartment. Love you. Move on in. Just an analogy of days. We're ready. For some intimacy. No, seriously. We're making a proposal. Long term. Married.
The city of Chicago.
Yes. But my actual question is actually for Michael, and I have just sort of got confused in the talk about the building and kind of exactly what the structure is.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like you essentially created a for-profit entity that owns the property and then perhaps lease that back, but I'm actually very curious.
So that's actually really, really helpful. So we, there's a longer history which I think is less important. Originally the building burned. We had the opportunity to buy it personally as a family. We gave the money to the National Black Theater to do that. So the building was owned by the National Black Theater for a long time. The city and the state came together and put up roughly $10 million to build this brand new facility, which is supposed to have a very low mortgage. And the city was supposed to basically refinance the debt. It's a very elegant structure. And that would have been perfect. Except for a long time ago, and there was a Law and Order TV show about this, my mom let Minister Farrakhan rent space in the building. His FOI got into a fight with the police department. The mayor of New York tried to have the FOI put out of the building. My grandma lived in East St. Louis, and they had protected her house for 3 months when there was no police there. So my mom was never going to put them out of the building, and the city pulled all our funding.
Wow.
And the state.
Wow.
And so the whole thing went into like a teetering jeopardy.
Yeah.
And they were looking for anything to buy this out of the building. So our board at that point was just protecting the property from this sort of very precarious political situation, which wasn't really even a business situation. And so my mom lived with that for a long time. And then finally, we had to move the building into a quasi structure where it was half for-profit, half nonprofit, with some other business partners that this kind of city and state put in later. We were both living our lives. I was on the board. The business partners that we had got into some financial trouble and wound up defaulting $1 million on some other stuff, and didn't pay the taxes and collapsed and stuff. So my mom passed away, we basically got like $8 million in debt when that happened. It was pretty crazy. Anyway, so that was the challenge. But the property was worth a lot of money, so that wasn't bad. We just didn't want to sell it. We didn't want to be put out of the property, and everyone wanted us to sell the property and take the money and not have a home and have the theater end. So that was our option. We picked a different path. So we put in about $1 million personally, and then we raised from friends and family another $500,000, and then I went to an insurance company that had been an investor of mine. They put up $12 million, and I just restructured everything. But to do that, I had to move the theater totally out of the equation because that was just a very hardcore real estate transaction in 2008, which was not easy to do because they weren't making $12 million loans then. So I did that, on a lot of personal favors. And the theater became a tenant for the first time in a long time, which is very emotionally difficult for the theater. And the object was to refinance that. Then we had to create some air rights to then create some development rights on top of that. And then, so now we're in the process of basically finishing that, selling that to really build a new facility, and the theater will move back in as a condo owner with a 30,000 square foot brand new theater, and it'll be a $25 million raise or whatever. So, and the whole project's going to have to raise $100 million to do that, but this part of it will cost me 25, which we're more or less going to finish. So that was like a very complicated thing that I had to deal with. Separate from that, the theater never could have even managed any of that, and it probably should have just sold the property and rented someplace else because it would have made money to do that, but that wasn't our vision. We've had that corner forever. The street named after my mom and her sister. So that was we just didn't allow that into our consciousness.
And I would say one thing that in thinking about what we were going to do, we knew that a part of the mission and vision were that one of our core programs is the entrepreneurial arts. So owning property, really like when Mom moved up to Harlem in 1968, like right after the riots, and everything was burnt out. People thought she was crazy, but she knew that investing in a community, especially from the perspective of culture, only would pay in folds moving forward. And everyone thought she was crazy when she said buy property. So when we were restructuring, we knew it was important for MBT to stay autonomous, because what our mission is we're committed to radically honest, authentic stories of Black lifestyle, right? Not the Law and Order story. And that can ruffle feathers. And to Susan Nelson's point, we are on a daily basis artistically taking lots of risks. So we knew we still wanted to own our property, but it became almost impossible with the debt. So how can we think creatively? So in our new structure, MBT still owns this space outright, and we still, in the new development, will have as much, if not more, square footage as we currently have. So we're not sacrificing anything except for understanding that hard conversation about what the artistic mission's capacity is, and so that we can do more focused mission vision work and not have to worry about a Manhattan city block to deal with.
Yeah. And just separately, just the last point is legally though, yes, to answer your question, we created a for-profit entity that has a separate group of investors, it has a separate business plan, has a separate 10-year plan. The theater, that business model is not a traditional business model, it's an impact investment model where you have impact investors involved in that relationship. But by moving it off of the theater's balance sheet, we went from the scary to the like cash flow positive vulnerable, and also too, it just freed up to have that conversation. And so that was very, 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 very helpful. And I think that's, for me, I think for theaters that wrestle with property issues, it is important to always have a permanent home, but it's also important that home be treated like a business, because real estate is not the same thing as operating as a property.
And I would say the last thing is, when we go to the city and when we go to funders, everyone says, well, what is stopping this new entity that owns the property from foreclosing on you or pushing you guys out if they don't deem? And so it was very important that we, as the estate of Dr. Barbara Antier, retained 51% ownership, or say be the managing partner in that
So I'm like
partnership.
the managing member of the real estate business, and
and the chairman of the theater, so there's no
You guys, that's great.
problem.
Question? Yes, Kristen.
Hi, Kristen Corey, founder of Gulfshore Playhouse, Naples, Florida. I would like to sort of ask a question regarding what you said with Ms. Nelson speaking about the broken business plan. And I'm consistently frustrated and questioning our actual business plan as not-for-profit theaters, because, so I'd be interested in hearing feedback from the panel about the idea that what we have to offer is so valuable. And you know, I don't need to tell this room that theater can change the world. We can change the world. People are lining up for iPhone 6s to pay extraordinary amounts of money for that, but then somehow we have this idea that goers and payers are not the same. And I don't, you know, musicians, for example, don't make money from recording music anymore. They're making music touring, and they're making music touring, and it's charging exorbitant prices to go to a concert. And people are going, people are paying for iPhones. And we hear, at this panel we hear, I was brought up by socialists. Oh yeah, I was brought up by capitalists. No wonder we make a great team. Where are you hearing that? Are you hearing that? Are the pundits saying that on your nightly news shows? You know, and so theater is so important. And I guess what I'm asking is, why does the business model, in order not to be broken, rely on one group of people being buyers, payers, and one group of people being goers? And how, you know, and is there a world in which we could charge the prices that it warrants and still make a portion of tickets available for the people that can't afford it, so that it's for everyone? And is there a different business model somewhere?
Yeah, I think that you might have misunderstood what I said. I mean, I hear all the time that it's a broken business model from people, whoever, I don't know. I just hear that. I know we all do. Or this model is broken, a nonprofit. And I like Susan's statement that she's not talking about the entire model. She's talking about your theater's business model.
But I'm asking, is the model broken? The whole model?
Well, what do we think?
I can tell you from a real estate standpoint, it is very difficult to sell tickets and cover my opportunity cost as a landlord. So just as a physical to mount a show, the cost of putting up a show, the duration that most shows are there. Like, if we were gonna do a commercial theater, I would have Sade do musicals. We have lots of hits musicals over 45 years, the whole catalog of it. I'd have buses coming from downtown, and we'd just be doing like gospel brunch, whatever. It would not be the work that we do, right? So that's like a different bit, like that's a different business. And so the trade-off is that for her to do more experimental theater and to have to develop new audiences and have to create these impactful statements. Now, musicals are great, I love them. Sade wrote one, it was awesome. But it's not the same work.
I think parts of the business model are broken. I mean, and you know, I'm somebody who looks at business models all the time in the for-profit world, and sometimes I invest in them, and sometimes they don't work. And I think the subscription part of our business model is broken, and it's not coming back. And so, in the same way that I would counsel portfolio companies of mine to pivot in a new direction, or at least a proportion of their business in a new direction if something's not working, we've done that at Victory Gardens. We've instituted a membership program, for example, and we look at other ways of making up for the subscription revenue that's probably not ever coming back.
I'll throw out another example. We looked at our education programs at one point, and we were frustrated by that too, because we thought, these things are fantastic. The number of kids that we're serving and what have you, it just was not paying for itself. It was so frustrating. And so we looked at what's the model behind that. We tried to step back and say, what are we really trying to accomplish here, rather than holding on to the programs we had? What was our big goal? And we spent a lot of time, months, just talking about that. And what we ended up doing was closing our education programs about 2 years ago for about a year. And we spent that time sitting down with LA Unified School District, with the Graduate School of Education at UCLA, and we found out what the real needs are in the education community. What do you guys want? What do you need? You know, we talked to science, math, everybody. And once we learned that, and we were able to put it together with UCLA and their educational professionals there, we came up with something that we knew the community was interested in having. And then we went out and looked for funders that were interested in that kind of work. And we linked them together. So then we ended up with an education program that was tied to funding that was already interested in that mission and that vision for education. And we launched the program a year and a half ago, and it's been spectacular since then. So it was a matter of changing the business model to a degree.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We also did that with the veterans program, because we invite veterans to the technical dress rehearsal. And we feed them, we offer them dinner. And it's been such a rewarding program. And we're in partnership with Gary Sinise. So it's finding, and Steppenwolf, yeah. So it's finding those areas of interest to your audience and your donors that you can really develop and work with the community, work with your major donors. And it's worked for us beautifully.
And I would say really briefly to your question too, I think for us it doesn't matter if it is broken as a field, like nonprofit theater is broken. I think what really does matter is our specific business model, because in looking at that, we can look at what our opportunities and challenges are, and it gives us an opportunity to change the narrative. So it kind of doesn't matter about the field. It really, because you waste time vetching, you know? And for us, it was like, oh, we know the field is broken, but like, what specifically can we do? And that was really empowering.
I saw somebody, I did see someone named Tim.
Just to exactly follow that comment, I think that the two things are not irrelevant to each other. I totally agree that I think, in general, the original template of the nonprofit theater franchise has a lot of broken parts. But that thought process of how do you make your business model exist perhaps in a new framework that sets a model potentially for the future. And in fact, all of you have done that, which is the thing that I'm really enjoying about this conversation, is that it's, but I do think for TCG, there's a relevant conversation to say, what about the model is now not working in the 21st century, so that we can avoid that particular set of pitfalls? Because there's some pretty static things, I think, across the whole field. Yes. And your comment about how other income is the fastest growing thing suggests that's true. So
I would say that as a fellow Lythcott, I just think there's a really lack of discussion about technology in this institution. Live events are increasingly competing in general with social media, TV, phone, right? So like movie chains are having this conversation, sports teams are having this conversation, like anyone that's and you know, I go to a lot of conferences that cover a lot of general areas, and you know, I don't hear a lot about how you can be leveraging technology better, because that's really where a lot of the younger people are interacting and going, how they're learning their lessons. So for me, part of the real decision, like, do we keep this building, right? Is it really holding back our transformative technology, which is an experiential technology, which isn't limited to a live performance, but it is limited to a real-time interaction, right? Because that's different than a canned interaction, and that's really what we can do, is create these real-time transformational moments that happen in a room, and how do you create that transformational moment leveraging, and you know, when we were little, my mom would take us to three-dimensional hemispheric theaters. So we researched augmented reality, three-dimensional. So when we think about this new theater space, a lot of my conversation is, how do I make this space a digital space that really engages, and Harlem's gonna have free Wi-Fi everywhere. So to me, it's like if you walk around the theater, you should be like zapped with the show, you know, whatever real time, like what is the core of what we do, that's transformational, right? That creates the framework for the impact. And how can we use and look at new technologies as they come to be experimenters of it, to work with Oculus and Facebook and Google. And so when I get past the real estate challenges, I think a lot about, and so what I would say, just as a piece of advice, is that going to lots of conferences, and not here today, I just don't hear a lot about that. And I think what's really hurting the models in this industry have to do with general competition for traffic, for eyeballs, for engagement, for people leaving their homes, because so many other things are now competing for that same time.
We're going to take one more question. Raise your hand. No. Oh, there's one. Okay.
I don't want to make you run. That's hi, Thanks for all your work. My name is Andrew Russell. I'm the producer and artistic director of the Intimate Theater, so I completely applaud and share your interest in figuring out what to do in the world at large. For the last 3 years, we've been producing with a different model. We've been successfully negotiating and paying down debt. This is a nerdy question, but earlier today we heard that perhaps debt doesn't need to be paid off right away. And it's interesting that all of you have or are in the process of paying down debt pretty quickly, and it seems like that actually was one of the first battles, if we're keeping the in the trenches metaphor, which is such a depressing. What we do is glorious, absolutely glorious. But I'm curious what prompted you to really tackle the debt first, and if there are any words of wisdom or success stories to those of us that are very near the finish line and really hoping to finish it quite soon.
The bank we borrowed the money from prompted us to.
Ditto. I would say that what you said made perfect sense to me. You know, if you have the luxury of low-cost debt and you have a good investment advisor and you're making better than 6 or 7% in the market, and this group can borrow directly for 2, like a government, that is a good, if you're in that situation, that's a good place to be. Our bank required that we pay them.
Yeah, really, we were driven because we wanted to go out and start a campaign, and we knew it would be difficult if we didn't do it, so we knew we had to tackle that first.
Okay, I'll tell you what, you guys, your theaters are lucky to have each and every one.